last October, my manager books me in Phoenix. And I don't do well in the heat. You wouldn't think, but no, I really don't. You can see the nice tan, but I don't do well. Now, I say to my manager, well, in October in Phoenix, isn't it hot? He says, oh, no, it's fall. No, it's not. It's Phoenix. It's Arizona. They don't acknowledge fall. It was the temperature of the sun. And at 7 o'clock in the evening, it was still the temperature of the sun. Who buys a house there? You buy a house and it burns up. Oh, I was not happy. And the guy comes and picks me up at the hotel, and I want to do a good show, and we're driving to the club, and all of a sudden I hear angels, you know. There's a Dairy Queen around here. I told the guy driving, I said, listen, pull over. I'm getting a milkshake because I've been dieting, but it's 150 degrees. You get a milkshake. Says that in a Weight Watchers manual. And the guy driving looks at me and goes, not now. We have to get to the club. Maybe later. Now, you know that's the wrong answer, don't you? So he wipes the blood from his head. And he says, you know what? I could use a milkshake too. Besides, I'm a little dizzy right now. I really shouldn't be driving. So I go into the Dairy Queen. I figured I'm all set. There's only one guy in line. But it's a very skinny guy. And he's asking questions. At Dairy Queen, what do you have to know? Chocolate, vanilla, you want stuff on it. Get out of the line. He's asking, how big is the small? Is it big? No, it's small. Smalls are small. That's why they call them small. It's 89 cents. Here's $10. Buy 11 of them. It's 100 degrees. I have to hear, how big is the small? Is it big? And that's when I killed him, Your Honor. Case dismissed. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure as always.
Good morning. It is Tuesday, June the 6th. This is the anniversary of D-Day, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the Star-Spangled Banner, we will have Fox News, No Free Lunch, The Rape of the Mind, Language, Gas Stoves, Part 1 of Chapter 4 of Philosophy Who Needs It by Ayn Rand. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and remove your hats for the national anthem of the United States of America.
Thank you. And now, there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen. Quote, work supplies the physical, psychological, artistic, and religious needs of communities extending to the ends of the earth. Furthermore, through work, we create abundance out of which we help meet the needs of others. Unquote. Victor Clark. There is no mechanism I have seen that more cultivates personal virtue or brings greater service to mankind than work. In work, we can find purpose. We can meet the most selfish needs of our inner selves, that is, the deployment of our time, the achievement of our goals, demonstration of our capabilities, and yet, all the while achieve the most unselfish of aims, the service of others. Work in human action is the verb of economics. And that was 250 Economic Truths from No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. Who is the true conservative? He knows that the government has no rights. He is religious. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American. Back in a minute. Thank you. What are the true conservative cultural priorities? Bring back hierarchy. Bring back the admiration of intelligence, morality, and beauty. Bring back single-income households, integration, parenting, the primacy of existence, certainty of knowledge, and universal rights and wrongs. Bring back principled behavior, masculinity and femininity. Bring back Adam 12, John F. Kennedy, the gold standard, pre-HMO medical care, and nonprofit news. Bring back civil service, the term stupid question, arguments and fights, the cultural influence of the church and the Boy Scouts. Bring back the influence of social organizations such as the Lions Club and the Rotary Club. Bring back bowling. Back in a minute. Thank you. And so now we have a little clip here from Fox News about the New York mayor's idea to house illegal immigrants in people's homes.
Are currently in the care of this city. I'll send it back to you.
All right, Madison, thank you very much. And, of course, they keep coming. Nicole Maliotakis is the Republican from New York, and she joins me now to talk about this. Congresswoman, good morning. Look, let's begin. I know you're not a fan of this plan, right?
Well, of course I'm not a fan of this plan. It's absolutely outrageous. Not only does New York City have a housing crisis, we have an affordability crisis. People are renting apartments in New York City for thousands and thousands of dollars. People are having difficulty paying their mortgage, paying their rent, keeping up with their property taxes that have increased year after year. And the mayor is now telling hardworking taxpayers that they need to pay so individual who crossed into our country illegally at the border last week can live rent-free. I mean, what planet are we living on? It's absolutely outrageous. And the mayor, I've said it before, needs to challenge, and he is, by the way, finally, after I've been calling for him for a year, to challenge this right to shelter law. It's finally going to go before a judge, because this was intended for homeless New Yorkers, right? Citizens who fell in difficult times, became homeless, to give them a shelter, not for individuals who just entered our country last week or citizens of other countries. It's just, of course, this is going to continue to just incentivize individuals to come over our border. That's exactly what's going to happen. He says they keep coming because you're giving them free housing.
You know what strikes me about this, Congresswoman, is the fact that for so long, those people, especially in New York and other, cities far away from the border, were very critical of the efforts to prevent people from coming illegally into the country. They were 2,000 miles away from where it was happening, but now it's on their doorstep, and they're getting a taste of what Arizona and Texas has been dealing with for years. So there's a little bit of, this is the reality of the situation. It'll be interesting to see if they change their mind on unfettered, migration across the border. Whatever happened to Homeland Security?
Well, you're absolutely right. And in a city, in post 9/11 world, New York City of all places should understand the dangers of having an open border. We found terrorists on the suspected FBI terror watch list attempting to cross over. Even in the interior, we found them. But in addition to that, you have enough fentanyl to kill millions of Americans being found on a regular basis now. The drug cartels have set up operations in our cities. It all needs to be stopped, and it can only be stopped if the president undoes the policies he put in place and secures the border, or if the Senate takes up the House's border security bill, which we passed last month. Senator Schumer has not passed our bill, and he has not passed his own bill. So he has to do something here so we can reconcile our differences and move forward. So short of the president or Senator Schumer doing something on border security, we're going to continue to see this crisis, and we should not have a mayor that continues to incentivize it. You know what's happening today in Washington? We've got the New York City Council Speaker, we've got the New York City Finance Chairman, Justin Brannan, here lobbying for more money so they can continue to add shelters, so they can continue to provide housing for migrants. I'm just not going to support that type of policy. We need to get border security in place, and we can work on immigration too, by the way. We should be addressing the issues of visas. We should be addressing the issues of judges and other matters so we can have a proper asylum process that flows and order at the border. But what's going on right now is unacceptable.
Absolutely. Close the border. Congresswoman Malliotakis, thank you so much for talking with us about this very important issue. We do appreciate it. Thank you very much. All right.
And that was Fox News covering the news that the New York mayor wants to house illegal immigrants in people's homes. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, The Rape of the Mind by Joost-Meerlo. And this is the administrative mind. Administrators today cannot handle their jobs adequately within the limits of simple knowledge of people and nations that served governments in former years. If our leaders cannot take into account the irrational forces in themselves and in other men and nations, they may easily be swept off into the maelstrom of mass emotions. If they cannot learn to recognize that their private or official conduct often reflects their prejudices and irrationalities, they will not be able to cope with the often unexpected prejudices of others. If they are, for instance, not sensitive to the paradoxical strategy hidden behind the misleading Aesopian language of totalitarians, they will not be able to counter the Cold War. Psychological knowledge has become a must in our area of confused human relations. Do our people in office, for instance, understand fully the provocative totalitarian strategy of slandering and wild accusation, and are they able to handle it adequately? Do they realize that the mere official denial never has as strong an appeal and impact as the initial accusation, and, in fact, usually fits into the accuser's strategy? Apparently they do not, for many still simply use official denial as a defense against the totalitarian strategy of accusation, when, in fact, only repeated exposure and ridicule of the very root of this technique can defeat it. Do they realize the implications of the strategy of raising sham problems? The totalitarian and demagogue often use this confusing technique by launching emotional inquiries and investigations and asking for attention for quasi-problems. They seek to divert attention from their real aims. Do they understand, for instance, what lies behind the technique of exploiting the chivalry and generosity of the public and blackmailing the pity of the world? The strategy of complaining and calling for justice is a well-known mental defense used by neurotic individuals to arouse guilt feelings in others and cover up their own hidden aggressiveness. The exploitation of pity and overt declaration of one's own purity and honest innocence is a familiar trick when it is used by individuals, but we are less likely to recognize it when it is used in international politics. Do our administrators realize that even the romantic ideals of brotherly love and world peace can be used to cover up aggressive designs? After the First World War, we heard many inspiring idealistic catchwords from the defeated Central European countries. Their press and their leaders described in great detail for all the world to know the inner purification through suffering of the defeated peoples. Thus, these countries appeal to the conscience and compassion of the whole world, but as a questionable conversion. Every therapist knows that those who talk a great deal about their inner change and recovery have, for the most part, not changed at all. The fine phrases are so often contradicted by actions. Politicians must recognize this can be as true for nations as it is for individuals. Let us not forget that nations don't talk. Official words are made up by representatives with unofficial and mostly unknown inner motivations. Administrators, diplomats, politicians form the nerve centers and paths of communication between peoples and nations. The tensions in the diplomatic regions represent the political tensions in the world, but they represent other things too. The political profession is subject to special kinds of nervous tensions. The moment the administrator arrives at a top level, an inner change may take place. From then on, he can identify with those who formerly led him. The very fact of being in office and being a leader may change a man's mind in many ways. Often he removes himself more and more from human problems and from the people he represents and thinks only in terms of national strategy, official ideology, and the aims of power politics. Or childhood ambitions long frustrated are aroused. He may become the victim of his inflated personal ambitions and his individual notion of responsibility and, as a consequence, lose control of his own personality. Leading statesmen, burdened by responsibilities, have to become more careful. Indeed, they often have to express themselves in non-committal language. Yet they are not aware that such language gradually may reform their way of thinking. Finally, they may think they possess a priority on double talk. Another difficulty is related to a rather general fear of success. Once a high ambition is reached, a long-hidden fear from childhood may awake. A fear related to an early competition with the father and with the siblings. From this time on, the envy and hostility of those bypassed may start to injure the statesman's life. The danger of assuming any leadership, even of any form of self-assertion, is that it provokes resistance and hostility, retaliation, and punishment. The administrator knows himself to be in the public eye. He feels exposed to criticism and political attack. If he didn't have it before, from now on, he has to develop a defensive facade in order to court the public and the voters. The result may be that the former meek Democrat, the believer in government by the people, suddenly takes on the stature of an authoritarian personality. He is guided by his frustrated, infantile fantasy of leadership. The administrative brain thrusters with all their inner problems nevertheless make history for us. Our minds are deeply affected by their minds. At the same time, we, the great public, influence them, and our civilized impulses may direct them to find the good road, just as our primitive drives and influences may urge them on to push us all into catastrophe. The intrusion of the administrative mind becomes even more precarious when the authorities in power follow patterns of procedure not controlled by court and the law. In such cases, prejudice and arbitrariness can easily develop, as we've experienced with many of our security regulations. Official secrecy is a token of magic power. The more hush-hush there is in the world, the less democratic control and the greater the fear of treachery. It should be, technically, quite simple to administer any group or nation or even the whole world. Mankind certainly knows enough to do this job. We know a great deal about history, sociology, and the science of human relations and government, at least enough not to repeat the mistakes from history. We live in a world of technical and economic abundance, but we have not yet learned to apply what we know or to organize the resources of the world. Somewhere something has gone wrong and things have gotten out of hand. The will of nations and people to understand one another seems paralyzed, and mutual fear and suspicion have been built up by the fantasies of mythical ideologies warring against one another. And tomorrow, only the tales of the fighting dogs may remain. During the Second World War, I was sent as an official representative of the Netherlands government to an international meeting on welfare and war relief. Here I became even more aware of the extent to which private passions can mold the way we handle public problems. All of us at the conference had cold, expressionless faces which implied a sharp, unbiased form of thinking, but our unconscious minds were touched by other problems. Welfare is often much more a subject of hate than of love and sympathy. One's pride and prestige can play a much greater role than pity for the poor victim. The displaced persons and the people of devastated and undeveloped countries are very much aware of this fact. They do not like the role in which fate has cast them. They have to play the double role of the eternal victim, who is not only the victim of politics and war, but also of the often arrogant provider of charity. As a matter of fact, the representative at the receiving end of the deal resented any offer made to his country. Everybody wants to be himself the generous uncle from America, quote unquote. And that was The Rape of the Mind by Joost-Meerlo, MD. Back in a minute. So a quick word on the gas stove situation. There's two governors, California and New York, that are deciding that they're going to go ahead and ban gas stoves in their state. And that's illegal. They have no authority to do that. And basically what they don't understand is it's them, those two, against 365 million Americans. And 365 million Americans are just simply going to ignore them. 365 million of us are just going to go ahead and use whatever stoves that we want to use, electric, gas, whatever, and there's nothing they can do about it. So remember, it's two of them against 365 million of us. Think about it. Back in a minute. Thank you. So listening to Sean Hannity, Donald Trump, and they're talking about the DOJ and what the DOJ is doing to Donald Trump. And Donald Trump's getting caught up in making predictions, and he shouldn't do it. He should not do that. That's wrong. Now, what's happening is he's making predictions about whether or not the DOJ will do this or that. He just, not too long ago, an hour or so, said that he predicted that they will charge Hunter so as to make his indictment look fair. And he could put a stop to all this. Everybody could put a stop to this by simply judging the DOJ, by simply saying the DOJ should stop this, that the DOJ is doing wrong. But nobody's saying that. Sean Hannity isn't saying that. Donald Trump isn't saying that. The only person saying that is me, the true conservative, because I'm the only one in this country that seems to know that if we're going to defeat the left, we have to get our language right. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Chapter 4 of Ayn Rand's book called Philosophy, Who Needs It?
4. The Missing Link, 1973. I shall begin by giving you 4 examples and asking you to identify what psychological element they have in common. 1. I once knew a businessman in a large Midwestern city who was an unusually hardworking, active, energetic person. He had built a small business of his own and had risen from poverty to affluence. He was the advisor and protector of an enormous conglomeration of relatives, friends, and friends of friends who ran to him not merely for loans, but for help with problems of any kind. He was in his late 30s, but acted as a sort of tribal patriarch. It was hard to tell whether he enjoyed or resented his role. He seemed to take it for granted, as a kind of metaphysical duty. He had probably never thought of questioning it. He did enjoy acting as a small big shot, however, and doing favors for people, about which he was very generous. He had apparently some marginal connections with his particular district's political machine, and loved obtaining for his friends the sort of favors that were unobtainable without special pull, such as extra ration coupons in World War II, or the fixing of traffic tickets. The concept of friends had some peculiar significance to him. He watched their intentions like a hypochondriac watches his health, in a manner that projected a touchy suspiciousness and a fierce loyalty to some unwritten moral code. Politically, he tended to be a conservative, and was usually complaining about this country's trends. One day he launched into a passionate denunciation of the liberals, the government, the unfairness to businessmen, the arbitrary power of political machines. "Do you know how powerful they are?" he asked bitterly, and proceeded to tell me that he had tried to run for some minuscule city office, but they had ordered him to withdraw his candidacy, or else, and he had complied. I said that such problems would always exist so long as government controls existed, and that the only solution was a system of full laissez-faire capitalism, under which no groups could acquire economic privileges or special pull, so that everyone would have to stand on his own. "Well, that's impossible," he snapped. His voice was peculiarly tense, abrupt, defensive, as if he were slamming a mental door on some barely glimpsed fact. The voice conveyed fear. I did not pursue the subject. I had grasped a psychological issue that was new to me. 2. A well-known lady novelist once wrote an essay on the nature of fiction. Adopting an extreme naturalist position, she declared, "The distinctive mark of the novel is its concern with the actual world, the world of fact." And by fact, she meant the immediately available facts, the empiric element in experience. The novel does not permit occurrences outside the order of nature, miracles. You remember how, in the Brothers Karamazov, when Father Zosima dies, his faction, most of the sympathetic characters in the book, expects a miracle, that his body will stay sweet and fresh because he died in the odor of sanctity. But instead he begins to stink. The stink of Father Zosima is the natural generic smell of the novel. By the same law, a novel cannot be laid in the future, since the future, until it happens, is outside the order of nature. She declared that the novel's characteristic tone is one of gossip and tittle-tattle. Here is another criterion. If the breath of scandal has not touched it, the book is not a novel. The scandals of a village or a province, the scandals of a nation or of the high seas, feed on facts and breed speculation. But it is of the essence of a scandal that it be finite. It is impossible, except for theologians, to conceive of a worldwide scandal or a universal-wide scandal. The proof of this is the way people have settled down to living with nuclear fission, radiation poisoning, hydrogen bombs, satellites, and space rockets. Why facts of this kind should be regarded as the province of theology, she did not explain. Yet these scandals, in the theological sense of the large world and the universe, have dwarfed the finite scandals of the village and the province. She then proceeded to explain what she regards as the dilemma of the novelist. We forget or ignore the events of the modern world because their special quality is to stagger belief. But if we think of them, our daily life becomes incredible to us. The coexistence of the great world and us, when contemplated, appears impossible. From this, she drew a conclusion. Since the novelist is motivated by his love of truth, ordinary common truth recognizable to everyone, the novel is, of all forms, the least adapted to encompass the modern world, whose leading characteristic is irreality. And that, so far as I can understand, is why the novel is dying. 3. The following story was told to me by an American businessman. In his youth, he took a job as efficiency expert advisor to the manager of a factory in South America. The factory was using U.S. machines, but was getting only 45% of the machine's potential productivity. Observing the low wage scale, he concluded that the men were given no incentive to work, and suggested the introduction of pay by piecework. The elderly manager told him, with a skeptical smile, that this would be futile, but agreed to try it. In the first 3 weeks of the new plan, productivity soared. In the fourth week, no one showed up for work. Virtually the entire labor force vanished and did not come back until a week later. Having earned a month's wages in 3 weeks, the workers saw no reason to work that extra week. They had no desire to earn more than they had been earning. No arguments could persuade them. The plan was discontinued. 4. A professor of philosophy once invited me to address his class on ethics. They were studying the subject of justice, and he asked me to present the objectivist view of justice. The format he proposed was a 15-minute presentation, followed by a question period. I pointed out to him that it would be very difficult to present in 15 minutes the basis of the objectivist ethics, and thus give the reasons for my definition of justice. "Oh, you don't have to give the reasons," he said. "Just present your views." I did not comply. The circumstances and the people in these 4 examples are different. The type of mentality they display is the same. This mentality is self-made, but many different factors can contribute to its formation. These factors may be social, as in the case of the South American workers, or personal, as in the case of the lady novelist, or both, as in the case of the Midwestern businessman. As to the professor of philosophy, the modern trend of his profession is the factor responsible for all the rest. These cases are examples of the anti-conceptual mentality. The main characteristic of this mentality is a special kind of passivity. Not passivity as such and not across the board, but passivity beyond a certain limit, i.e., passivity in regard to the process of conceptualization, and therefore in regard to fundamental principles. It is a mentality which decided, at a certain point of development, that it knows enough and does not care to look further. What does it accept as enough? The immediately given, directly perceivable concretes of its background, the empirical element in experience. To grasp and deal with such concretes, a human being needs a certain degree of conceptual development, a process which the brain of an animal cannot perform. But after the initial feat of learning to speak, a child can counterfeit this process by memorization and imitation. The anti-conceptual mentality stops on this level of development. On the first levels of abstraction, which identify perceptual material consisting predominantly of physical objects, and does not choose to take the next crucial, fully volitional step. The higher levels of abstraction from abstractions, which cannot be learned by imitation. See my book, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. Such a mind can grasp the scandals of a village, or a province, or, at second hand, a nation. It cannot grasp the concepts of world or universe, or the fact that their events are not scandals. The anti-conceptual mentality takes most things as irreducible primaries and regards them as self-evident. It treats concepts as if they were memorized percepts. It treats abstractions as if they were perceptual concretes. To such a mentality, everything is the given. The passage of time, the 4 seasons, the institution of marriage, the weather, the breeding of children, a flood, a fire, an earthquake, a revolution, a book, are phenomena of the same order. The distinction between the metaphysical and the man-made is not merely unknown to this mentality, it is incommunicable. The two cardinal questions, the prime movers of a human mind, why and what for, are alien to an anti-conceptual mentality. If asked, they elicit nothing beyond the conventionally accepted answers. The answers are usually some equivalent of, such is life, or one is supposed to. Whose life? Blank out. Supposed by whom? Blank out. The absence of concern with the why eliminates the concept of causality and cuts off the past. The absence of concern with the what for eliminates long-range purpose and cuts off the future. Thus, only the present is fully real to an anti-conceptual mentality. Something of the past remains with it, in the form of stagnant bits of a random chronicle, like a kind of small talk of memory, without goal or meaning. But the future is a blank. The future cannot be grasped perceptually. In this respect, paradoxically enough, the hidebound traditionalist and the modern college activist are two sides of the same psycho-epistemological coin. Psycho-epistemology, a term coined by Ayn Rand, pertains not to the content of a man's ideas, but to his method of awareness, i.e., the method by which his mind habitually deals with its content. Psychoepistemology is the study of man's cognitive processes from the aspect of the interaction between man's conscious mind and the automatic functions of his subconscious. The first seeks to escape the terror of an unknowable future by seeking safety in the alleged wisdom of the past. What was good enough for my father is good enough for me. The second, to escape the terror of an unintelligible past by screaming his way into an indefinable future. If it's not good enough for my father, it's good enough for me. And paradoxically enough, neither of them is able to live in the present, because man's lifespan is a continuum whose only integrator is his conceptual faculty. In the brain of an anti-conceptual person, the process of integration is largely replaced by a process of association. What his subconscious stores and automatizes is not ideas, but an indiscriminate accumulation of sundry concretes, random facts, and unidentified feelings piled into unlabeled mental file folders. This works up to a certain point, i.e., so long as such a person deals with other persons whose folders are stuffed similarly, and thus no search through the entire filing system is ever required. Within such limits, the person can be active and willing to work hard, like the Midwestern businessman, who exercised a great deal of initiative and ingenuity within the limits set by his particular city district. Like the lady novelist, who wrote many books, within the terms set by her college teachers. Like the professor of philosophy, who spent his time analyzing results without bothering about their causes. A person of this mentality may uphold some abstract principles or profess some intellectual convictions without remembering where or how he picked them up. But if one asks him what he means by a given idea, he will not be able to answer. If one asks him the reasons of his convictions, one will discover that his convictions are a thin, fragile film floating over a vacuum, like an oil slick in empty space. And one will be shocked by the number of questions it had never occurred to him to ask. This kind of psycho-epistemology works so long as no part of it is challenged. But all hell breaks loose when it is, because what is threatened then is not a particular idea, but that mind's whole structure. The hell ranges from fear to resentment to stubborn evasion to hostility to panic to malice to hatred. The best illustration of an anti-conceptual mentality is a small incident in a novel published years ago, whose title, unfortunately, I do not remember. A commonplace kind of blonde goes out on a date with a college boy When she is asked later whether she had a good time, she answered, "No, he was awfully boring. He never said anything I'd ever heard before." The concrete-bound, anti-conceptual mentality can cope only with men who are bound by the same concretes, by the same kind of finite world. To this mentality, it means a world in which men do not have to deal with abstract principles. Principles are replaced by memorized rules of behavior, which are accepted uncritically as the given. What is finite in such a world is not its extension, but the degree of mental effort required of its inhabitants. When they say finite, they mean perceptual. Within the limits of their rules, which are usually called traditions, the inhabitants of such worlds are free to function, i.e., to deal with concretes without worrying about consequences, to deal with results without bothering about causes, to deal with facts as discrete phenomena, unhampered by the intangibles of theory, and to feel safe. Safe from what? Consciously, they would answer, safe from outsiders. Actually, the answer is safe from the necessity of dealing with fundamental principles, and consequently, safe from full responsibility for one's own life. It is the fundamentals of philosophy, particularly of ethics, that an anti-conceptual person dreads above all else. To understand and to apply them requires a long conceptual chain, which he has made his mind incapable of holding beyond the first rudimentary links. If his professed beliefs, i.e., the rules and slogans of his group, are challenged, he feels his consciousness dissolving in fog, hence his fear of outsiders. The word outsiders to him means the whole wide world beyond the confines of his village or town or gang. The world of all those people who do not live by his rules. He does not know why he feels that outsiders are a deadly threat to him, and why they fill him with helpless terror. The threat is not existential, but psycho-epistemological. To deal with them requires that he rise above his rules to the level of abstract principles. He would die rather than attempt it. Protection from outsiders is the benefit he seeks in clinging to his group. What the group demands in return is obedience to its rules, which he is eager to obey. Those rules are his protection from the dreaded realm of abstract thought. By whom are these rules established? In theory, by tradition. In fact, by those who happen to be the leaders of his group. The way it stands in his mind is by those who know the mysteries he does not have to know. Thus, his survival depends on the substitution of men for ideas, and on the subordination of the metaphysical to the man-made. The metaphysical is beyond his grasp. Laws of nature cannot be grasped perceptually, but man-made rules are absolutes that protect him from the unknowable, psychologically and existentially. The group comes to his rescue if he gets into trouble, and he does not have to earn their help. It is given to him automatically, and it is not the precarious mercy of his own virtues, flaws or errors. It is his by grace of the fact that he belongs to the group. As an example of the principle that the rational is the moral, observe that the anti-conceptual is the profoundly anti-moral.
And that was part 1 of chapter 4 of Ayn Rand's book, Philosophy, Who Needs It? Back in a minute. Thank you. Who is the liberal? He is the man that seeks consensus. He is subjective, petty, and small, taking everything in life personally. He's outrageous, boring, and rude. He pretends to be a leader and a change agent. He pretends that he's your friend. He is sly, cunning, and deceptive. He dresses, acts, and speaks like a slob. He's informal and terminally unique. He's childish and pretends that he knows nothing. He has no conscience and pretends that might makes right and that the ends justify the means. He is impulsive and rationalizes his behavior. He is deterministic, blaming others for his mistakes. He is skeptical, demanding that others solve his problems. His unreasonableness and irresponsibility make him a bad role model, bad father, brother, family member, friend, and a bad person, period. So if you think that you can be friends with a socialist, think again. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.